Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. A fundamental resource for mankind and humanity. There is not only a possibility of financing morals, and I will like to go back later on to the economic discourse, but this is the basic statement, recovering human dignity and humanity. I live in Trieste. There is the so-called carsism, meaning that mountains are watertight to water, and if the sources of morality and dignity, human dignity, are going to be parched, everything will be lost. We are eroding the human moral capacity of handling conflicts in a situation where it is necessary to have some capacity to be friends, being capable of handling conflicts with generosity without exploiting speed and thus taking away from others the possibility of reacting. Human dignity doesn't simply mean human rights. That's something more. That means treaties, agreements, things, covenants, fundamental things. And if we lose the sensitivity, the affectivity, the deep ethos meaning that makes us human, is going to be lost. This is an epochal change. The world belongs to the human race. We've sort of polluted the depth of oceans. And we've also reached Mars. We've landed to Mars. We are destroying and creating some ecologic green debt, human debt, which is awful. And there is something informal whereby each organization, even if they have a clear-cut task list, very well knows that there are some overlaps between the different organizational matrices, the accountants, director generals, CEOs, staff managers. So we have to use informal mechanisms, informal places to react. Even the cabinet, even when at home, in front of the coffee machine, we have to bear in mind that the other is not just simply a threat. It may be a threat, but most of all is a person, is a human being. It's a resource with whom you can do some business. Let me tell you a story. In 1979, there was the first treaty, the one of Neskins, between China, the China of the Emperor Manchu, Kanzi, and Russia, with Peter I, the great Tsar, Peter the Great, and they wanted to enlarge their trade spaces with China. But the Cossacks were accessing China, and they were bringing havoc in order to get leather and cereals. So they had to do a peace treaty in order to define their own borders and to do some business together, because everyone had to sort of patrol their own borders and not be a threat to the other, because borders had to be open, accessible. In this episode, the historical episode, the two Jesuits were participating, a French Jesuit and a Portuguese Jesuit. They were not always seeing eye in eye. They were not always agreeing. They had their own European identities, but they were helping the emperor in the sort of linguistic mediation, that is translation. That agreement was signed and then written in 5 different languages: Russian, Manchese, Mandarin, Chinese, and Latin. And then another language. No, sorry, it's just enough. And even Mongolian. And the Jesuits did that. After some years, they obtained from the emperor a tolerance edict whereby Christians would not be prosecuted. And they had seen that even the cultural dimension, one of them was a musician, a Portuguese musician, whereby art, linguistic skills, the wish for peace stood for fundamental resources. And mankind, whenever we talk about morals and morality, we refer to the assets of man. So there was a need to invest in man, a fundamental asset. Whenever the Pope talks about the development of an integral good, an asset, that means that they are referring to the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations for Sustainable Development, and with the 17 following global goals. I hope that you will get to know them. That stands for global ethics. It's a platform of global ethics. Objective number 12 has got to do with business, companies, corporations, how to certify their own respect for people. If you respect people and you help them grow, you automatically respect the environment, because the have-nots and the poors are the ones that suffer when the environment is destroyed. So putting first environment and then the have-nots is wrong from the methodological point of view. The common ethos is something that has got to do with these things. Objective 16, and here I'm saying this because this is a political treaty, it's not a binding one, but it allows us to have a capital, cognitive, a common capital, a shared one, an ideal shared capital. You can acknowledge the other, and you acknowledge the covenant, the promise that was made, not a treaty, a promise, whereby we mutually forgive ourselves for being Italian, Russian, American, because sometimes it seems that this is the original sin, the one of belonging to a given nationality. We talk about circular economy. Objective 16 has got to do with the management of violence that ensues from wars and from public corruption and criminality actions. All of them are factors that destroy the human asset, the human relational capital and asset. Now, I'm saying this because the European Union is in deep crisis. The common market, the European Union, was born so as to allow the market and to the countries to grow, to have lots of fiscal revenues from taxation, and the European Pact or Covenant rests upon a welfare pact and a pact amongst nations, whereby we help us sustain, we mutually sustain welfare. And the economic crisis was clogging the market mechanism. The social pact within the European notions has worn out, and there are 70 associations, populistic ones, pro-Russian, anti-American, anti-globalization, and all of them are, as the Prime Minister says, this is an issue which has not simply got to do with migrants, which is only a foreign thing, but it's the result of the wearing of the social pact. Even the Euro-Asian Union makes it so that if an Armenian citizen doesn't feel as Russian, sharing same fundamental rights, then things will never work out. If a Greek unemployment is not to be considered as an equal counterpart that is a German unemployed worker, then that won't work. We have to feel ourselves as citizens belonging to the same geographic territory. If borders are only meant to express our power in terms of army and firing powers, then we are going to be a threat, a mutual threat. The Lithuanians will no longer feel safe, just as their own counterparts. Building something upon social relations, building the European Union upon common mechanisms, whereby we have to consider the social shock absorbers. We have to consider common unemployment goals, many financial tools as well, the Euro bonds, for example. We have to consider the common European institution which is issuing Euro bonds. And definitely that's not going to be the European Commission. It could be a common entity or common teller of the European Union. We have to understand that the social capital and the social asset is the most valuable asset that we have. That's where we invest with cultural associations, with young students and citizens that travel across the world. All of you, the economists, the priests, the artists, the businessmen, well, all of you have to proceed along the tracks of this dual-track economy, because that's where you can meet people, needs. You are on the real front where intermediation relations exist that bring together intermediators, clients, customers, the social systems. You are going to be the most valuable asset for your own people. So let me conclude by saying that we need to produce something. We have to produce and generate good information. Why good information? Because that's what's missing. Sometimes it's bad information. Sometimes it's misinformation. I live in Trieste, and sometimes we go in schools and we talk about war. But what I'm saying is that if you want to know peace, you have to get to know war. And the Russian fleet in the Northern Sea with its naval forces and with Admiral Kuznetsov with their own sheep vessels should navigate into the Syrian seas. But if we look at that and we understand that from a twofold warring point of view, whereby the Dardanelles and the same Gibraltar Strait may be blocked from the naval point of view, then we see that all of them are signals that won't help. They are not symbols of destruction. So sometimes we have to inform, train, prepare our youth because they have to have a precise understanding of what war is, of what relations are. And they have to understand that the system has grown to being something which is so highly complex that we need new metaphors. The metaphor of the Cold War no longer works. We have China, we have India. And let me conclude by saying that the important thing of that treaty is that China and the Manchu emperor were treating on an equal footing and dealing with the Russian emperor on an equal footing. So that means that they've understood that if you're different but equal, you can do many important things. But then if you understand that if instead of a threat, you allow for opportunities and for the incredible asset of working together, then we can be happy, each one, of working in the framework of regional blocks. We can redefine our borders. The great challenge of the Middle East, even in Europe, in the Baltic countries, in such a way that even if Kosovo won't be united with Serbia, they will be doing trading transactions, accessible things. This is where we should build our future. We will have to have new models based upon new moral responsibilities and accountabilities. Thank you.
Экономисту трудно говорить о морали, но так получилось, что я являюсь членом Совета при Патриархе всей Руси по экономике и этике. И один из самых главных вопросов.
It's important for us to discuss all of us experience a Christian society. We live according to Christian morals. And at the same time, we have to say that capitalism, the capitalism that was born in the 1500s, was that capitalism that had to give up some principles. That is the prohibition of loan sharking and usury. By the year 2008, the share of the financial sector from the viewpoint of redistribution of profits can be found in the United States, and even the statistical data can be found in the United States. Now, this quota in the financial sector was as high as 70%. Now, what happens is that the mediator sector started redistributing more than 70% of all of the total profits generated by economies. In such a situation, it is difficult to preserve man and mankind. And we know that we've gone down to a quota of 35%. It's not enough to have 35% because banks have to work in very difficult conditions. So let me ask the following question. Would you say that this situation means that we perhaps have to give up the financial model that was true of the NATO economy of the 18th century? And maybe we should go back to basics and to basic principles that existed much ahead of that period, and which is what Islam is suggesting right now. Would you say that? Things that you mentioned are concrete. Capitalism in Italy was born in order to fund and finance trade, meaning that it was making it easier. It was a facilitating thing. It was born in Italy. The problem was represented by more powers, oligopolies, because it wasn't working. There was no true competition. There are situations in terms of large societies which de facto means that large money, big money is made on the basis of revenue and profits, which is not helping us. There are some bottlenecks because this is a barrier to access. We have to create different economic systems that allow for access to credit lines, to consumption, to activate their own commercial and trading activities. Capitalism was developed in Italy, but in parallel there was an entire other totally different development, which was the world of pawns, meaning how to work on all of these levels with the large financing provided by international agreements and public systems. Large investments, big investment will never be done, because investing in a railway network is something that only a state can do. So trying to understand how to remodulate the taxation system, that's a fundamental thing. We have to increase controls. But it's not an easy thing, because they can bottleneck everything. Everything by now has turned into a war mechanism. So funding and finance also serves the possibility of applying sanctions and of being distorted to geopolitical purposes or geoeconomic purposes, strictly speaking. So this is something that we've lost control of.